what's going on, guys? Welcome to Clinic Growth Secrets, where we teach you how to get more patients, make more money, and keep the patients as long as humanly possible. Now, I am beyond hype for today's guest because this guest truly fits all the bills of our show in a cash world and really in an insurance marketplace where in many markets, the insurance is just not as profitable for the doc as it could be. I think this gentleman really has embodied the cash-based business. And so he's going to be able to share a lot of value, both in terms of a little bit of acquisition, but he's really been dubbed the king of retention. And so before we get into the goods, reminder to pay the fee. The fee is very simple. If you guys get value from the show, we get to give you some new insights, new perspectives. Share it to somebody who needs to hear it. Okay. We don't fill your ears full of crap. We don't have a bunch of advertising of stuff that I don't use just to make money on it. We don't do any of that because we want to say what we want when we want. So the only way for us to grow organically is by you guys hitting the share button. We do operate on value exchange. If we do a good job, send it to somebody. And if we don't send it. That's the value exchange economy. And so today, I want to introduce you to a man who not only understands the chiropractic world, but has really revolutionized it. Truly a catalyst for long-term patient care, founder of Cash Practice, and again, dubbed the king of patient retention. Dr. Miles, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate you having me here. And it always feels a little weird hearing that term, king of retention, but nonetheless, I appreciate the introduction.
I think it's great because we're so focused on acquisition. And to be fair, my listeners are very acquisition focused because I'm the acquisition guy and for a lot of people. But retention is such a big thing, and I think that's where you're going to be able to add a lot of value to the listeners on today's show. Now, obviously, it doesn't begin with you becoming the king of patient retention. I mean, I'm always curious because everyone seems to find this industry in different facets. Where does your story start?
I'm glad you asked that question, and I'll keep it brief so that we can get really into some great material. But I chose chiropractic at a time when I was studying to be an engineer. I was studying to be an electrical engineer, and one day I woke up and realized, hell, crap, this isn't for me. I don't want to be an engineer. And here I'm my senior year. I literally woke up my senior year deciding, I don't want to do this. So I went on a mission to figure out what I wanted out of life, and chiropractic fell into my lap. And I ended up pursuing to become a chiropractor. And I thought I was going to save the world. I launched my practice in 1994 called the Chiropractic Wellness Center. And I was going to, lay my hands on people's spines and save their lives and all of that kind of stuff. And I ran full speed into a brick wall. And what do I mean I ran into a brick wall? I thought I was going to have all this great success, and I didn't. And the reason I came to realize I didn't is because I got into chiropractic just at a time in Southern California when insurance was going to crap. The Mercedes 80s, while all the docs that were in my neighborhood who had been practicing through the 80s were driving their Ferraris and killing it with insurance, I wasn't experiencing that because insurance dried up early on in the mid 90s at that time. And here I'm running a place called the Chiropractic Wellness Center. Everybody coming to my practice wants to use their new HMO that they got, and I'm not part of it. And as a result of that, I couldn't provide care to them and make any money. And literally it got to the point where a year into practice, I was ready to give up. I was literally ready to stop being, close my doors, go back and finish my engineering, and just give up on it because I was struggling. And the struggle came from just not only being able to, I didn't have a problem acquiring patients. It was actually enrolling them and keeping them. And just, here's what really did it for me. I'll share with you is that, well, I'll keep it brief. Let me keep it this way. It got so bad that literally at the point where my family, I couldn't support my wife and my little girl at the time. And we had enough money to keep our doors open, but nothing to live off personally. And I literally had to call my mom and dad and ask if we could move back in with them. And here I am, a business owner. I'm a doctor. I'm all these things that you expect to have success. And meanwhile, I have to humble myself and pick up the phone and ask mom and dad if we can go live with them. And we did. We moved back in with my parents. And during that window of time, I got my wits about me. My wife talked me into not giving up. And I got some help. And that help I got was around the world of doing care planning, of how do you talk to patients about care plans and how do you sell them care and how do you do that stuff. And I quickly grabbed it and I quickly learned it, and it turned a corner. And it got to the place where within a year or two of doing that, I was really killing it. I started doing really, really well in practice to the point where my wife and I could move out, and we bought our house, and we turned a 180-degree corner. It was care planning. It was learning how to sit down with a patient and do a great report of findings and how to sign them up for care. And I had learned what many doctors are being taught to do, which was how to sell care, how to enroll them, how to get them to prepay for care, how to do those things. And then I had an epiphany one day where I was having all these people who had signed up for care, and I was having a taste of success. building my practice. And it dawned on me one day that people are still not following through. They're still not staying the course of care. They're still dropping out. Like, Jeff, if you were my patient and you had prepaid me for care and 6 months went by, it was routine for me to see these people who at the end of their care plan said goodbye and they left and they didn't stay. And I found that very frustrating. In fact, the way I'll best describe it is, if any of you, Jeff, have you ever experienced someone breaking up with you? I know I have, like in dating, in the dating world, they break up with, and it hurts. It doesn't feel good to be rejected.
Of course.
And that's how I felt every time a patient dropped out of care. I literally felt like they were leaving me. And that heartache really kind of tore at me. And I was on a mission to figure out, well, how do I get past that? And really what drove it home is 1 week, I had 3 families that had prepaid me care. They were all in the military, and then something happened where they all had to get transferred out of town. And it was not their decision. They just had to leave. So guess what I had to do? I had to refund a bunch of money, and I had the pleasure that week of writing about $10,000 of refunds. Now, the money was there. It wasn't a problem to do it, but it sucked, right? Not only was it emotionally hard to lose patients, but in this case, I realized, well, shit, I'm now running my life based upon money that I'm collecting that's really not mine. Like, I'm building this life kind of almost like a house of cards, where at any point in time, if all those people disappeared, or a lot of them disappeared, not only would I have to refund a lot of money, but I would be in a lot of financial trouble. So I realized there's got to be a better way. And there was. And ultimately, I discovered, and I won't say I discovered, I just kind of saw the idea of doing monthly payments with patients. And I started doing that with my patients. And that's really when things took off. So how did I become the king of patient retention? It was learning how to do great care planning and then changing my business model to be a recurring monthly payment model. And this was back 20 years ago when people didn't have cards on file. And this was all kind of a new idea back then. It wasn't like it is today where you see it everywhere. And that's what ultimately took me to the place where by the time 2011 rolled around, when I retired from practice, my average patient, my PVA, patient visit average, had been just over 300 visits.
Wow.
And I say that the national average PVA, I don't know if you know this, Jeff, but it's 12 visits. That's how long on average a patient stays in the clinic of a chiropractor in America right now, is 12 visits. So my average was 24 times the national average, where patients stayed. And here's what I want to emphasize, docs. Patients staying under care, it's not about the money. Yes, you make a boatload of money, people staying under care. It's cheaper to keep people than it is to acquire people. It's all of these things. There's a lot of benefits. But at the end of the day, the reason it's important to keep people and have them stay the course is because that's where you get the true miracles of chiropractic. That's where you get the true realization of people getting the best outcomes of care. That the reason people don't necessarily get the best outcomes clinically with their chiropractic care, it's not because you don't know the magical adjustment you need to know. I'm sure every one of you know a great adjustment, great care. You're great with your hands. It's not that you don't know what you're doing. It's the patient's complete failure to follow through. And if you agree with that sentiment, as I say that, then I would encourage you to learn what you need to do in order to get people to follow through so that your patients are getting better clinical results. So that's what drove me, is I wanted better clinical results. I wanted to have better experience, and the success came along with that, but that wasn't the driving force. So it's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but that's what got me into it. That's what led to where Cash Practice is. Those are some of the challenges we overcame, was running into these insurance headaches, which we see that are occurring everywhere right now. And really, when it comes to retention, I'll pause after I say this one thing and give you a chance to say so, chance to interrupt me.
This is great. This is terrific.
And that is, when I ask doctors, and I've had the opportunity now to work with literally over 7,000 practices. We've spoken with a lot of practices. And when I'm out lecturing and speaking and speaking all over the nation, we often ask this question, like, what do you think drives patients' behavior for patient retention? Like, we have this conversation, and it always comes back to the same thing. Docs say, well, if patients knew what I knew, if they were educated, they understood what we did, they would listen and they would follow through. And I got a bridge to sell you, because there is more knowledge today for patients to understand what we do than ever. Like, Jeff, I'm sure you know someone, and someone listening to this podcast right now knows, you know someone that knows they should be eating better and they choose not to.
Correct.
And there are people you know right now that they know without a shadow of a doubt they should quit smoking, and they don't. And there are people you know right now that know they should be exercising more, and they don't. They have the knowledge, but it doesn't influence their behavior. And I'm pointing this out because we chiropractors are blind in this fact that we think if patients just understood what we do, if they were just educated, if they knew the big story of chiropractic, they would follow us to the ends of the earth. And that is the biggest lie we've been taught in our profession. That right now, I guarantee you as a listener right now, ask yourself, do you have patients who know what chiropractic is and they still drop out of care? And I bet the answer is yes, you do. And I bet you also have patients who don't have the foggiest idea how chiropractic works, and they've been with you for 20 years. That regardless of their knowledge around what we do, they either stay or they don't for their own reasons. And my point is that I'm not here to say don't educate. Absolutely educate your patients. What I'm here to say is don't be blind and stupid and think just because you educate people, they will stick to care. There's way more to it that drives your patient's behavior to listen to you and follow you. And that's ultimately what we bring to the table. My company and what I do now is we teach doctors and give you the tools to make sure implementing what you need to be doing beyond patient education to make sure they're following through with care. Long-winded answer to your question, but that's ultimately what drives us here.
Oh, it's so brilliant though, because it's exactly right. I think the all great advice, we learned this from our mentor, all great advice is counterintuitive, right? And so if the normal advice is that, hey man, you want patients to stick, all you got to do is just make them smarter, make them more intelligent, educate them around chiropractic, then everyone can stick in perpetuity. Because I think most docs are natural educators. They like to teach, they like to help people genuinely. And part of that is teaching and educating, you know?
Absolutely.
But then we still see these practices where it's like, I'm educating, but they're not sticking. And the same with conversion. I'm educating, but they're not buying. They're not buying care plans. They're not investing, right?
Absolutely. And in fact, when you bring that up, when we're out teaching, and we'll often teach a day one, day two, a master day one, day two, how do you do a consult, report, all the kind of stuff that's often chiropractors need to learn. And our approach is vastly different than everything else that's taught out there. Everything taught out there is basically educate the patient and use patient education basically as a vehicle to convince the person to get care. I'm summarizing, but that's generally what's done. And there's varying levels of fear that are kind of dipped into that conversation and maybe some sales conversation that's used in that conversation. Whereas the approach we take in that exact experience is nothing, we don't use patient education at all. We've identified that what drives our patients to engage us and stay with us is not how well educated they are. It's that they have this gut reaction. They have this feeling inside. Now, remember, I was studying engineering. Engineers aren't we're analytical people. We're not feeling people, right? So this was a big lesson for me to learn and grab into. I just want to point that out, that this come intuitively. It was like a lot of study and experimentation had to go into figuring this out. Ultimately, what we discovered is our patients say yes to us and stay with us because in their gut it feels right to them. It feels right. It feels right that they're in the right place. And I'll share with you the way we teach doctors to have that patient have that experience is it's not through education. It's through getting really good at connecting with patients, building trust, and creating hope. Those three emotions that when you drive those in your patients, when you are really good at connecting with people and building rapport, when you're really good at purposely creating trust, and when you're really exceptional at building hope in your patients, those emotions are what will drive your patient's behavior to say yes to you and to follow through with you. Has nothing to do with patient education. In fact, in our process, there's almost no patient education that goes on in that day one, day two process. So it's counterintuitive, as you used that term before, to what's traditionally being done out there.
It's so brilliant. I often say on the show when it relates to patient education, it's like we humans choose what we want to learn, right? So like the joke what we always run at CGA is try educating a pig on geometry, right?
Right.
Like not only is a pig not going to get it, but you're going to be extremely frustrated too, you know? So I think that like the level of education is like to your point, I think education can often be flipped with the word enlightenment, right? So like that back to that fostering and creating hope for the future. You know, if I stick with Dr. Miles and his care, my life will continue to not only go in the right direction, but not go in the wrong direction equally as much, right?
Correct.
And I think for me, you know, so it's funny that you and I are having this conversation because I'm an engineer by trade. That's what I went to school for, so I resonate a lot there. And when I look at the docs, because I started my journey on a 36 visit corrective program, and then the guy moved away, and it was just too far to logistically make sense of, you know. And the next doc that I ended up choosing, I chose because it feels the most right to me. That's exactly why I go to him still, not
Yep.
because he's like, I mean, yes, he's a great adjuster, but for me and my body and the intuition, there's a lot of other people that can deliver care. but for some reason, my gut points to him every time.
1000%. It's a gut reaction that drives our behavior. And there's so many things we do in practice that enhance that gut reaction. And docs, there are a million things you do in practice that sabotage that gut reaction.
Mm.
There are
Can we
things we
can we
do.
talk about
Let me
that?
get, yeah,
Yeah,
you know
can
what
we?
I'm saying?
I would say, can we linger on that for a second? Because like,
Sure.
if we could talk a little bit about the sabotage, and if we can not do that, that's equally as valuable as what we should do.
Well, it's interesting you asked that question. When I was studying and learning this stuff in my practice, I literally turned my practice into a laboratory where, think like an engineer, like solve problems, gather your data. And the way I did this is I started interviewing patients. And I would set up a video camera back in the day when you had a VHS camera and
Yep.
set it up in my practice. And patients would say, "What's the camera for?" And I'd say, "Well, it's funny you ask. Those who are asking me, I would randomly like to ask you some questions about your experience here at the practice. And is it okay if I film you?" And yeah, sure. And I did this with dozens of patients. And I would ask them things like, "Well, John, you've been here now for a year, 100 visits or whatever it's been. Why are you still coming in? I'm just curious what drives you to be here." Or I'd ask other people like, "Hey, Mary, you chose to come in here and you're paying the way you're paying right now, monthly payment. Let me ask you, if we had presented your care and had you paying a different way, what do you think your experience would be like? Just kind of, entertain me here. What would it be like if you had paid this way or this way?" Or another question we might be asking people like, "Hey, Mary, when you came in, I remember very clearly when you came in, you were adamant about you didn't want to do, you didn't want to be sold a program of care. Like you didn't want to do a care plan. You made that clear to us from the beginning. But in spite of that, after me presenting my care to you, you enrolled in a care plan. Mary, why did you say yes? I mean, you're really curious. What changed for you that you said yes to it? And here you are a year later, still getting care." And I'd have these really kind of heart-to-heart conversations with people. And I would get answers to these things. But when I went back and reviewed these videos, I really paid attention to the language people use. And to this day, I still do. I really am very clear, very specific, very aware. Like even before we prep, right? You said we're going to go live.
Hmm.
And I asked you, "Are we going live?" You said, "No, no, no, we're recording," right? I'm really specific to the language people uses. And both in communicating and in listening. It's just something I do.
Hmm.
Um, that's the way my brain works. So I was listening to these videos, and one of the things I saw routinely being said was the word convenience. The word convenience was probably the most common word among all the videos of all the interviews I did, is that convenience played a major role in people getting care. That inconveniences, anything that was inconvenient, whether it was wait times, driving, whether it was appointment, whatever it is, anything that created inconvenience in the practice was a sabotager to retention. That, and I studied more about it. And what I realized was that when patients first come in and they're in pain and they're hurting and they want relief, which is generally most people, they will tolerate most inconveniences to stay under care, to get care. But once someone's feeling better, if something becomes inconvenient about it, they're gone. Jeff, you just mentioned you changed chiropractors because the doctor moved, that it was inconvenient for you to
Totally.
travel to that doctor, right? That's what got in the way. It was inconvenient. What I'm getting at is that docs, here's a really powerful lesson or a powerful team meeting you could have with your team as you sit down and you brainstorm with your team like, "Hey, nothing's off the table here. What are all the things we think create inconveniences for our patients?" And you identify them on a whiteboard, like, this is inconvenient, this is inconvenient, are our hours inconvenient, or are the way we schedule inconvenient? Is it, I'll give you an example. There was an office I was at recently where the way the CA booked the appointments, it was just cumbersome. It was just a cumbersome process. Like she needed some training on how to better schedule her appointments, both in her communication, as all of it. Everything that creates that kind of subluxation to the way things flow, you
Hmm.
need to identify those and remove them, because every one of those is a speed bump to retention in your practice. Every one of them. So that's the best way I can identify is to address that, is that it usually revolves around time, location, and money. Time, location, and money, and flow. Those things that create kind of blockages are really what you need to remove. Let me give you an example that's not really about convenience, but how these subtle things will influence behavior. Jeff, let's pretend right now you're not interviewing me, but instead you're a bar owner and you asked me as a consultant to give you advice on how to better run your bar. Let's pretend that scenario right now.
Okay.
And I go visit your bar. It's Friday night. I come visit it and I observe what's going on for a couple hours. And I meet with you and I say, "Jeff, you're doing a great job. Your bar has great service, great products. Great atmosphere. Everything is awesome, but I understand you want to improve sales and improve your sales. So here's what I'm going to recommend. Jeff, tonight or the next night, whatever it is, I want you to go to the store and buy a big bag of salty pretzels and salty peanuts and some bowls, and I want you to put them all over all over the bar for people to snack on. And I come back the next day and I ask you, how are your sales? What happened? And what do you tell me?
Sales went up.
Why did they go up?
People get thirsty and people stick around longer when they have snack food.
They stick around longer, and the salty food makes them want to drink more. A subtle little thing you added to the environment, and it changed your patients, or not your patients, your customers' behaviors,
right?
Your behavior, and it influenced your outcomes. And I go back and say, all right, that's great. That's awesome. Let's do one more thing. I noticed one other thing at your bar that I want you to change, and that is I notice people are kind of leaving the bar early. They're not hanging out at the bar. And what I'd like you to do so that people hang out at the bar itself more is I want you to install some little hooks under the bar so people can hang their bags, because there's nothing there for them to set their bag down or to kind of secure it. And later on, if you like that idea, maybe we could add some USB ports for people to charge their phones or something like that. But right now, let's go with some hooks. And you do that, and lo and behold, I come back the next day, and you've said, yes, people are spending about 15 extra minutes at the bar on average, and we've increased sales. What I'm getting at are these subtle little things you can do that have nothing to do with your product or service. In fact, by no means did you ask all of your patrons to come to a workshop to learn about the benefits of drinking alcohol, right? There was no education about, like, you didn't say you should be drinking more because it's, you're going to have more. Like, there was none of that. You just added a couple little things and it influenced your customers' behavior. And I'm saying that in your practice, these things are going on as well. There are subtle little things that go on, some of them subtle, some of them major, that will influence your patient's retention.
It's just so much value embedded in all that, what you just said there. A couple things to like talk about too that I can see, and I can also talk about in my own experience too. When people have to think and constantly pay every time they come, that becomes for me an inconvenience. I don't want to pay every freaking time. I want to show up, to take care of business, and roll. Monthly auto debit. We preach that for wellness, right? The other one that I think that a lot of people in industry are guilty of, that you alluded to, is hours of operation, right? And so what happens is I look at these practices in our world, I'm always looking to see, like, okay, who are the people that are making a boatload of money at CGA? Who are the people that are making okay money? And who are the people that aren't doing well at all? And what are the patterns? The people that make a bunch of money are the ones that have great hours of operation. They're open before people go to work. They're open after people are done with work, because what they want is quality patient. And one of the mechanisms of quality is you got to have money, right? That's the first thing that disqualifies somebody to make an investment. But if you don't start seeing patients until 10 and you stop at noon and then you start again at 3 and go to 5, you miss the entire work crowd who has money.
Absolutely.
Right? And so it's just, I see that in that far spectrum of people that don't do great in CGA or out of CGA. They refuse to change those inconveniences that they know reflect what the market wants, but does not reflect what they want. So they go with what they want and they lose income because of that.
1000%. That you must have hours that are convenient for your primary patient base. And if that's going to be people working, that's going to be before and after work. Absolutely. My own personal practice, I saw patients, my adjusting hours, which were very limited, were 8 to 10 in the morning and 4 to 6 at night.
Those are great.
Everything in between was for new patients and report of findings. And as we just got done saying, your new patients who are hurting, they'll tolerate inconveniences. They'll miss work for that one appointment or those 2 appointments. But when it comes to your routine care, yeah, you need to be available when people are getting off work. And that's when you're hopping. That's, no new patients, no report of findings at the time. You are just bouncing from patient to patient to patient, adjust. And that's, those, you're absolutely right. 1000%. And you mentioned the auto debits, you threw in their wellness care. I want to clarify, for us at least, we're all about monthly payments. It's one of the things we do at Cash Practice is have our doctors on. One of our systems is an auto payment system, auto debit system, for the doctors to do their payments, and our care plan calculator for doing the care plans. But what I was going to get at is we do that for new patient programs too, not just wellness programs. Like a new patient program, if you're enrolling in 6 months of care or a year of care, whatever it is, we want you to be on a monthly payment right from day one. We don't want you to prepay and then later try to convert you to monthly. We want you on a monthly from day one is the approach we like to take. More importantly, or more likely, we'd love you to make a down payment followed by smaller monthly payments. So it's a little bit of a prepay, a portion of it, let's say a third of it down, the rest of it's monthly, and that allows you to easily transition people to wellness care.
It just creates that the human behavior habit too, right? Or it's like
Yeah, there's a lot of psychology in this. It's one is you're establishing the habit you want right from the beginning, or the I hate to use the word habit, it has a little bit negative connotation, but in essence, yeah, it's fit into their household budget. They're used to doing it. But here's why it's so powerful, Jeff, is I want you to imagine right now you just completed your program of care. So you're now 6 months in, a year in, whatever it is, and you just completed. And let's say you prepaid me the care, or maybe you've been just paying visit by visit, whatever. But for the sake of this conversation, let's pretend you prepaid. I'm one of the docs that wants you to prepay. And I get you to prepay, and you paid me $4,000 last year. Now it's time to renew your program. I have to have a conversation with you about, hey, you're ready for wellness care, your x-rays have improved, blah, blah, blah. And you now, as a patient, have a decision to make.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to spend more money? It's an actual decision because you haven't spent money in my clinic for the last year. So that money you spent a year ago, you've forgotten about it. Now you have the decision, do I want to spend new money?
Right.
And now you're like, well, I don't know. Let me think about it. Maybe not, etc. Versus if you had been paying me monthly, let's say you've been paying me $350 a month for the last 12 months. And you just paid me just a few weeks ago, your last payment. And I say, great news, Jeff, you're ready for wellness care. Your x-rays have improved, your wellness scores improved, you're ready to transition to wellness care. And by the way, your $350 payment's going down to $175.
So
and when I'm able,
time.
right, and it's a no-brainer, right? It's
no-brainer.
a no-brainer, right? Because that's like putting salty food at the bar. It's a subtle little change, but it has a dramatic impact. By simply saying to a patient, your monthly payment's going from this to this, from 300 down to 200, that's perceived very differently than, hey, it's time for you to sign up for the next program. It vastly changes the conversation. And ultimately, when I went from prepay model to a monthly payment model, I didn't know this at the time, but I observed after doing it for a while that my transitions to wellness care skyrocketed.
Yeah.
That's the exact thing that led to the 300 PVA. Was going from prepay to monthly and skyrocketing the number of people going from initial program to wellness care. That's what did it. That was the magic sauce, I guess you would say, or the magic formula for going into that have high retention. So if I was to kind of summarize to the listeners right now, what does it take to drive retention? It's number one is present a full care plan to patients. We call that forecasting care. Second is you make their payments automated. We'll call that frictionless payments, and you'll see why I'm calling them this in a moment. The third is we want to give our patients regular feedback. So our giving patients feedback so they know they're making progress. And then the fourth is our marketing side is we want to have frequent contact with our patients. That's our marketing, our education, our text messaging, all of that stuff that we do to stay in contact with our patients. We call these things the 4 Fs: forecasting care, frictionless payments, feedback, and frequent contact. Those 4 things are what we identified you must do throughout the course of care to drive retention. So the takeaway is if you want retention and all you're doing is focusing on the frequent contact side of things, the education, you're missing 3 of the 4. All 4 of them are key. And I will tell you, the forecasting of care, which is your care plans and your payment processing, your frictionless payments, automating things, they will drive your retention the most. They have the biggest impact on retention. They're like adding, the salt to the food, the salty food to the bar.
Absolutely genius. One of the things you said too, just to kind of linger on it a little bit, was kind of like that seamless transition. Hey, you're paying me $350 a month, but you're going to go down to $175 now. So it's just like, oh, okay, I'm paying anyway, same date, same time. It's just less. Great, easy, yes, easiest yes you can get as salespeople, right?
Yes.
On top of that, though, I always when we teach that principle, we don't talk a lot about the how. We talk about the what on this show, but I'm going to give a little how. We always say good news and great news. The good news is we don't need to abandon what's working. The great news is you're actually going to be paying us less every month.
That's awesome. I love it.
Right. So there's good and great news, especially as you go into the maintenance phase, because you should already have that rapport. And if you combine that with those 4 Fs you just mastered right there, like you're off to the races. And that's 100% too. We talk to people. I'm going to go a little bit polar on like what creates no retention, right? It's the opposite of what he just said. But I think to throw a little bit of rocks with love to the listener, because I'm always trying to encourage.
Yeah.
Pay-per-visit model is a definition of zero retention.
Absolutely. In fact, when I'm teaching, we'll often show pay-per-visit model. There's actually 4 models. There's the pay-per-visit model, which is the worst retention. The next is what we call the block of visits. Block of visits, I have my patient buy 10 visits at a time. Usually the doctor doing that is someone who they're having patients, the report of findings kind of goes like this. I go, hey, Jeff, here's the care you're going to need. Let's have you schedule enough visits to get to the next progress exam, and then we'll take it from there. Yep. There's no long-term commitment. It's just exam to exam. So they have them buy like 10 or 12 visits to get to the progress exam.
There's no forecast. There's no forecast, right?
There's no forecast, right? There's none at all other than the next progress exam. And that patient usually drops out after 1, 2, maybe 3 progress exams, and you lose them because every progress exam is associated with them having to make a decision about buying more care. Every progress exam, they have to decide, do they want to buy more care? So that's it's not a great model.
Back to like having the money conversation too frequently, right? Exactly. They got to make decision.
What you just said there is we often teach is that what gets in the way of patients staying under care are the decisions. We actually say the more decisions they have to make, the less likely they're going to stay with you. So we want to remove as many decisions as possible, and you clearly just stated that. The third model is the care plan, but a prepay, and then the fourth model is the care plan, but monthly payments. And we see each of those have a higher retention. That generally a pay-per-visit practice will be stuck around 12 visit PVA. A block of visits will generally be stuck somewhere between 24 and 36. A prepay model is usually somewhere around 75 visit PVA. It's a good PVA, but they get stuck there. The monthly auto-debit practices generally have PVAs of 150 plus.
That's crazy.
And we see that across the board. In fact, when I'm working with an office, I just hear how they're doing their business side of things, and without knowing anything else, their PVA is pretty predictable.
Just based on their model.
Just based upon their business model.
That's why I love business so much, dude, is you can actually start to influence just little things, adding the peanuts, have such an influence on PVA, right?
Yep.
God, that's so good. We may have to do a full retention masterclass together. I'd love to host you. I mean, I think we could go for 5 hours on this,
I'll share with you. I've taught as long as 11 hours. I don't want to do 11 hours.
No. We'll do. I do no more than 60 minutes, but I do think it would be, we'll talk a little bit after the show, guys, but I think we're onto something here because with the limited time we have, like, we're just getting started, man.
We are. I'll be frank with you. Generally, when I'm out speaking, and just so the audience knows, I'm traveling the country 5, 6, 7, 20, it could be as many as 10, 15 times a year at different state associations speaking. So just 2 weeks ago, where was I? I was in, where was I? Oh, we were in Tennessee, we're in Alabama, Missouri we're going to, we'll be in Maine in next month, I think it's either November. Like, we're traveling all the time speaking. When I say we, myself, and then Holly Jensen. Holly Jensen is our Chief Operations Officer.
Okay.
Holly has been working with me for over 20 years, 22 years now, I think it's now.
Oh, wow.
She was my CA. She ran the office, and now she's been running cash practice now for a long, long period. So when we go out and speak, it's me as the doctor presenting and her kind of giving the CA perspective. But we'll teach anywhere from 4 to 8 hours on the topic of retention, on this exact topic. And there's so much to unpack. But I gave you kind of a high-level overview of this stuff that really, the listener right now, if all you did was apply those 4 Fs, get really good at forecasting care, get really good at frictionless payments, do frequent contact, give your patients feedback. Now, there's good and bad ways of doing all this, and then really get good at your day 1, day 2 process. That's kind of, let me just say this. When you want to be a professional at something, professional athlete, professional baseball player, they all master the basics. Like, if you go to spring training for baseball, what are they practicing? They're practicing the same damn things that little league players are doing, right? They're mastering the basics. And as a chiropractor, the basics that we need to know include an incredibly awesome day 1, day 2, knowing your business. These are the basics. And if you're not mastering them or a master of them, I'll jokingly say you're a chiropractic hobbyist. You're not a professional. That if you really want to be a professional, you'll roll up your sleeves and tackle this subject and be like, okay, I'm going to master day 1, day 2, where that 95% of the patients I see coming in from your marketing are saying yes to care. It's not 5 out of 10, it's not 2 out of 10, it's 9 out of 10 are enrolling in care. And that's what we generally see, that when doctors apply this stuff, they're signing people up like nuts. Like, we're not sharing screens right now, but I'll share with you that case studies of doctors who started with us 10 years ago that were doing 200,000 a year, 10 years later are doing 2.2 million a year. And why they've gone from, why they 10x their practice over the course of a decade? because they're continuously adding new patients to the practice with their marketing. And more importantly, they're not losing them. And when you start filling that practice and filling that practice, and you're not just replacing the people you're losing, right? You can market and get all these new people, but if you're losing them on the back end, you're just kind of replacing them, right? It's churn. You're just churning them.
Massive churn.
Yeah. So if you can keep them, that's where the practice becomes a monster. Or a client of ours who went from 2.2 million when they came to us. Now they're doing like almost close to 5 million a year in revenue. They're doing these numbers because they're adding people and they've solved the equation. They've listened to us, and they're applying the principles, and they're not losing the people. So I love working with guys like yourself who are all about new patient marketing, because that's not our gig. We are not new patient experts. In fact, it's not something I enjoy doing, of marketing, getting new patients. I love teaching doctors about retention. So when we can partner with someone who, like, they're awesome at getting new patients, it's like peanut butter and jelly. It's peanut butter and jelly. It's like, a Reese's peanut butter cup. It goes so well together for doctors to combine the two. Because when you can do both, when you can get lots of new patients and really master keeping them, practices really grow and explode.
It's just endless, man. God, there's so much synergy too. One thing you've said about the basics, right? And we always have a saying too: advanced people never skip the basics.
Exactly.
Right? You cannot become advanced by skipping the basics. It's not like you reach this level where all of a sudden you're only advanced and you don't need to work on your batting. You don't need to work on your day one. Like in sales and retention and everything in the service business, I don't care who you are, you're never good enough at anything.
And I'll say that chiropractors, I'm speaking to doctors, we'll spend hours, we'll go to seminars all weekend to learn about adjusting techniques and clinical stuff. And more power to us, right? We want to be masters of what we do. And we spent hours and hours and hours. And we went through school and spent semesters of learning our adjusting skills. And some of us, even once we're out of school, and we're just continuing to hone our hands and our skills. And that's great. And we should continue to do that. My question is, are you putting an equal amount of time in your basics of your communication and in your day one, day two? Because at the end of the day, you could have lightning bolts flying out of your fingertips. But if people aren't following through, what does it matter? It doesn't matter how good your hands are if people aren't following through. So it's really, really important.
Amen, man. So much value in today's session. It's such an acquisition focused show, and that's why I really wanted to have you on, because I knew we would go so deep in retention. I mean, I learned. Again, I think I'm better at acquisition than retention for sure, at least for our clients, because that's what we do. But I mean, I got pages of notes just in this
Awesome.
of what's, you know what I mean? Tactical stuff that people can implement, and I think we need to revisit this. I think this is the beginning of something, and I'd love to do a master class. And for you guys listening, keep an eye out for that, because I do see that coming down the pipeline. Now, for people to obviously want to get in touch with you, Dr. Miles, and learn a little bit more about cash practice, where should we point them on the show notes?
So I'll give you a couple different resources. Number one is the internet. Everybody's got the internet. So let's just start with our website, cashpractice.com. So the domain cashpractice.com will take you to the page, and you can peruse it and learn all about what we do. What I would encourage you to do, if you really want to understand what we do, is click on the button at the top that says book a call, and you're going to be able to schedule a time to speak with one of our cash practice experts, one of our retention experts at Cash Practice. They will show you our software. They'll answer your questions. There's no hard sale. There's no pressure. It's none of that kind of nothing. It's just simply, let me demonstrate it for you. And if you see value in it, we're here to answer your questions and provide some service to you. If people do work with us, I'll just share with you right now. We're a month-to-month program. There's no long-term contracts. If people sign up with us, you can try it out. If you decide it's not for you, you're not locked in anything. So it's a really non-committal thing. But I will tell you, our clients have been with us for decades. Like Tony Ebel. I'm sure a lot of people who know Dr. Tony Ebel has been a client for over a dozen years with us. And I don't want to just name drop a bunch of people, but there's a lot of people that you probably know that are out there teaching that have been Cash Practice clients for 10, 15, 20 years. Not 20 years, I shouldn't say 10, 15. I don't want to exaggerate, but 10, 15 years that have been around for a long time.
I love that.
Nonetheless, that's one way to do it. Another thing I would encourage you to do is just for fun, there's another website I'll point you to called loyalpatientjourney.com. loyalpatientjourney.com. And that's a web page. It's a free resource where you can learn about the 4Fs, and you can learn about this journey we take patients through where we execute the 4Fs so that you can see when's appropriate to do each of them and how we do them. And we answer the questions of why do patients drop out of care and how do we solve that problem? It's a really great resource. It's free. There's nothing to buy there. It's just a resource for you to look at. I'll mention one more, and we didn't talk about this, but you asked me at the beginning of the podcast here about my story. that question comes up often. And because it came up often, for fun, back in 2018, we produced a movie, a full-length feature movie with actors and a script and the whole thing. Like, I mean, like a real movie, called The Calling. And if you want to watch it, it's about a 45-minute movie. I would encourage you to, as a chiropractor and CAs, go watch it. Most people find it very inspiring. It's the story of being called to serve as a chiropractor. And you can go to thecallingmovie.com, thecallingmovie.com. You could also get to it by going to cashpractice.com and clicking on the About Us. You'll see our story as a menu item on there. That page is a place where you can go stream that movie for free. And we've got a lot of great feedback. So at one point we were, saying we want to tell our story. Like, I think it's a great marketing thing to do, is tell your story and people know who you are. And we were going to write a book like a lot of people do. And we just decided, well, screw it. We're not going to write a book. We're going to do a movie. And so we hired a movie producer and produced the movie.
All of those links are going in the show notes, everyone.
There you go. The calling movie, cashpractice.com, and the loyalpatientjourney.com.
We'll put an extra link in there for the book a call page too for you.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, I love it, man. I think that's great. This is the start of something, because I think that retention is what builds businesses long term, great stable businesses, especially in the cash market. Acquisition gets all is the knight in shining armor. It's the sexy shit, but the retention is really what builds it.
It's funny you say that. I often say, like, it's exactly right. Chiropractors have a heroin addiction to getting new patients. It's the sexy topic. Everybody's like, what's the next best? Give me the next marketing thing I need to do to get more new patients. And there's such an attraction to it because, quite frankly, doctors need new patients. Like, if they don't have new patients, their revenue tanks. I mean, that's what happens in a practice that doesn't have retention. So it's the best of both worlds. Once you have a lot of retention, it's not that you don't want new patients, you don't need them. And so then you do marketing, you do the things you do, and you can accept higher quality people. Like, you can have more fun and joy in practice, quite frankly. You just have more pleasure. So I love the fact that there's companies like yours, Jeff, that are out there helping doctors with the sexy topic of getting new patients and, the shiny object of how do I get more new patients and getting them. But at the end of the day, like you just said, that's retention is what builds the business long term.
100%. And if you want to drive yourself absolutely nuts, only focus on acquisition and never focus on retention, because at the end of your whole career, you'll basically still have nothing to show for it.
That's right. You're right. You're absolutely. In fact, I know this weekend you and I are going to be at an event this weekend together, and the focus of that event is business. And I know one of the topics we're going to be talking about this event is a topic on building value in your business to be able to exit that business and sell that business at one point, right? Well, let me just tell a quick story here, and that is, if you take two practices that are both exactly the same, they're both collecting $40,000 a month, same volume of people, same everything. The only difference is one of the practices is getting $40,000 a month, and it's all prepay money. It's all new patients coming in, and every month they're getting lots of new patients, and they're getting a lot of people signing up, and they're collecting $40,000 a month. And the other practice is not that. It's all retention. It's all recurring revenue. It's $40,000 a month of ongoing recurring revenue. And you value those two businesses, that recurring revenue practice is going to be 3 to 4 times the value of the practice that's prepay based. Now, when you go to exit it and sell it and all those things, that practice is much more valuable. That when you look at the market in the world of selling a business, recurring revenue is the gold standard. It is it's what buyers are looking for. They are looking for businesses that have stable, long-term clients who are on a recurring payment model that will drive the value of your business up tremendously.
So good, man. Unbelievable. And it makes sense, because for the owner, what are you looking for? We're the buyer. You're looking for stable, consistent revenue that's not going to drop off when ownership changes.
Exactly. 1,000.
Man. We're going to talk more on this weekend. When I see you at this event, we're going to talk more about putting together a masterclass. That's for sure. Because I'm actually really excited, because we barely scratched the surfaces, man. But Dr. Miles, I appreciate you spending time on the show with us today, sir.
Jeff, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course, sir. If you guys got value, remember to pay the fee. Dr. Miles, his work over at Cash Practice. We talk a lot about acquisition, but today was all retention focused. If you guys got value, or maybe you've got a colleague in the chiropractic space that's just has a little bit of a leaky bucket over there, maybe send this episode over to them so they can get value from it. Until next time, guys, I appreciate you guys, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.